Hello, my name is Stratis Minakakis. I'm a Greek composer currently living in the United States. It's a great pleasure to have written the piece Diaploys for the competition of the Greek chapter of the Percussive Arts Society. I'd like to share with you some thoughts that will help you in the interpretation of the piece, as well as offer some technical insights about the sounds and the rhythmic organization that I want in the piece. Diaploys is loosely based on an excerpt from the 13th book of Homer's Odyssey. As soon as they reclined, they rowed vigorously, and upon his eyelids fell a deep slumber, without awakening, most sweet, very akin to death. This excerpt describes the last journey of Odysseus to Ithaca. As the boat is sailing, Odysseus is overcome by a very deep sleep that Homer describes as something both very sweet and also very similar to death. In this sleep, he is allowed to forget about all of his previous adventures, all of the hardships he has endured, so he can start from a fresh perspective once he lands to Ithaca. And I like very much this combination of the hypnotic state of this deep sleep, but also the memory of all the hardships and all these things that he has endured. So this image inspired the creation of Diaploys. In determining how to play the individual gestures of Diaploys, you must take into consideration three parameters. The first parameter is physical action. What do you need to do with your body in order to play the specific sounds that I ask for? The second parameter is the parameter of rhythm. How do the individual rhythmic gestures fit into bigger patterns? The third parameter has to do with the placement in the overall structure. For example, if you see a measure where there's a forte marking, you must take into consideration how does this forte relate in the overall movement. For example, if in the movement you have another place where there is a triple forte, that forte should not be louder than the triple forte moment. So it is very important to be aware of where you are in the overall dramatic structure of the piece when you determine how to play the individual gestures. The following video and audio recordings explain what I'm asking for in terms of specific sounds, especially with respect to bendir that appears in the first movement. The first effect I'd like to show you is the irregular vibrato that happens at the very beginning of the piece and comes in various other places. There are many ways that this can be done, but the idea is that it should sound like an irregular echo after the initial attack. The first movement has two basic ideas. The first idea is characterized by short pulsations that require a special technique so that each pulsation has a small element of echo to it. The second idea consists of a glissando that happens with the participation of the left hand. Here it is very important that you measure out exactly how fast the left hand is moving. For example, here is a measure of 3/8. in which you start from a lot of pressure and you go to little pressure. There's another way to do the same thing, but also paying attention that the eighth notes are equal. So it is important to practice exactly the timing of the left hand, and during the left hand actions there are a lot of rhythms that the right hand is playing. When you combine the two elements, you can hear a glissando effect in the overall pattern that could sound like this. The second idea has a second component to it, and that is two different types of scrape sound. The first one, that is indicated with a raised finger symbol, involves scraping the drum with the soft part of the finger. When you combine this with a glissando effect with the left hand, you hear a much softer glissando that sounds like this. The other scraping technique that is used in the first movement involves the nail of the right finger. When you combine it with a glissando effect, it sounds like this. Of course, these scraping effects sound softer, so when you see sforzantissimo or piano, you should expect that the overall sound will not be as loud as when you play with a regular finger without scraping. The first movement concludes with two bars that introduce a new sound. This sound has two components. It has a very quiet roll with one hand that can be also played in several ways. And the second element is a rhythmic attack that can be played on the wooden frame of the instrument with the other hand. When you combine the two sounds, the overall effect sounds something like this. In the second movement, you have a lot of glissando effects on all the drum instruments, in the toms, in the tumba, and also in the bass drum. It is very easy to do stepwise glissando effects on the toms and on the bass drum, but it takes a little bit of practice and imagination to figure out how to do a control stepwise glissando in the tumba. I would like to propose one method that relies on 4 different positions of the elbow. The last thing I wanted to explain in terms of the individual sounds that are used in the Diaploys concerns the third movement. In the third movement, there's a third type of notation that exists referred to as notation C. This notation describes what you need to do in terms of the bongos and the timpani pedal. You must find a way so that the open part of the bongos faces directly above the timpani skin. Now notice that you never actually hit the timpani skin. You don't need to make an attack on the timpani. You only use the timpani as a resonator for the bongo attack. Not only that, but you also modify this resonator by adjusting the pedal in the timpani. For example, in the very first attacks that you see in this image, you have two loud attacks on the bongos, but at the same time, with your foot, you're adjusting the pedal from an A down to an E flat, and back to an A, and then to an E flat. You must control the speed of that gesture very carefully so that you have full amplitude of the pedal motion. To show you what this effect sounds like, in the next image, you can hear an excerpt from another piece that I composed about a year ago that also uses the same effect. The piece is entitled Apoplus 1. Finally, I would like to address some aspects of rhythmic complexity that appear in the piece. In some cases in my music, you could find a contradiction between the time signature and the way the rhythms are organized inside the bar. This is the result of a process of adding note values to a simple bass pattern. To show you how this works, I would like to analyze measure 62 from a rhythmic perspective. The bass pattern consists of 3 eighth notes. Working inside the pattern, I'm attaching one 32nd note at the end of the eighth notes. And the final part of this process is that I'm attaching a 64th note at the beginning and at the end of the pattern. So you have a complex pattern that results by simply adding some elements to a very simple 3/8 pattern. There are several structures like this in the piece, and it is up to you to find them and to perform them accurately. Another aspect of complexity in my music comes from the fact that frequently there is more than one rhythmic layers involved in a single action. An example of that is measure 79. In measure 79, there are two different layers. One is defined by the actions of the left hand, which is the hand that does the glissando gestures. The rhythmic values here are quite simple and consist only of eighth notes. In measure 79, you have 3 eighth notes, and in measure 80, you have 5 eighth notes in the space of 3. You can also think of this as a change in tempo, where the eighth notes of measure 80 are at a metronomic marking that is 5/3 times the metronomic marking of measure 79. It is very important to keep these durations very precise because they can function as a compass that allows you to keep track of what the right hand is doing without losing sense of time. That being said, the right hand frequently has rhythms that are quite complex. That is not the case in 79 because the rhythms there are quite simple. But in measure 80, there is a certain amount of complexity involved. In a case like this, I'm not so interested in a computerized precise rendition of the exact durations that I have written. But I'm very, very interested in hearing the rhythmic ratios between the figures. To illustrate what I mean, look at the third image. You can see that the pattern of measure 80, when seen without any tablets, consists of groups of long and short durations. It is very important for me to hear this relationship when you perform the rhythmic action. So it is possible for two successful performances not to be absolutely equal with each other, but they must bring out this relationship of short to long in the time that it takes to play this gesture. So you must think of the left hand as some kind of secret metronome that allows you to keep things in time, and the right hand should express the ratios of the patterns that I'm giving. If you have any other question with respect to the piece, please don't hesitate to contact me. The best way to get in touch with me is by sending me an email at the address that you see on this screen. Thank you and good luck to all of you for this competition.